Good evening, and welcome to our community conversation with Reverend Mariama White-Hammond. I'm Reverend Mary Margaret Earl, the Executive Director and Senior Minister of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry, and I'm happy to introduce my colleague this evening.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Monique Veale, and I'm the Director of Special Projects at the Urban Ministry. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yes, and tonight, so for those of you who don't know the Urban Ministry, the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry is a nearly 200-year-old organization that's based in Boston. The three things that we do in this year of 2021 are we have services and programs for survivors of domestic violence, including a shelter and a workforce development program. The second thing we do is after-school programming for high school students from Boston. And part of that after-school programming, in addition to tutoring, is cultivating an appreciation for history and sense of place. And some of our young people train to be tour guides to lead historic walking tours. And finally, the third thing that we do is broadly what we call community engagement, which is all the ways that we build relationship in the community that we serve in Roxbury. And this is part of that community engagement work that we're so happy to offer this evening. And so this is just one in a series of community conversations we've been having through this year. And Monique, would you like to tell people more about the conversations themselves?
We're happy to do that. So thank you. So as Mary Margaret said, our community conversations gave us an opportunity to stay connected to our community during a very challenging time in our country. And the conversations highlight the history, the art, and experiences of our Black and Indigenous people of color. These conversations give an opportunity for us to raise awareness around some of the issues that plague the residents of color in Boston neighborhoods. These conversations also provide information on how to support local organizations in the work that they are doing to help people of color and the demand for justice. So we look forward to having you join us again June 22nd to have a conversation with Byron Rushing on Facing Yesterday to Face Tomorrow and Today. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Monique. So to begin, we're happy to share what we're calling a commitment minute, which is a message from our sponsoring congregation. This evening's sponsoring congregation is Theodore Parker Church in West Roxbury, a congregation who holds Reverend Mariama near and dear to them. So they were especially excited to sponsor this. So here's our commitment minute.
Hi, friends, and welcome. I'm Ann Bancroft. I'm the minister at Theodore Parker Church here in West Roxbury. In 1712, when our congregation was founded, we were actually an offshoot of the first church in Roxbury where the urban ministry is located. So we have a long history with the urban ministry and with First Church, so we're really glad to be able to participate tonight and sponsor this community conversation. We're also really excited about the work that the urban ministry has been doing all year to keep our communities connected and keep us informed about what's going on in Boston and help us build relationships. We're so grateful for all that good work. And we're really excited to be sponsoring this event with Mariama White-Hammond, who is a longtime friend of Theodore Parker Church. Mariama came to West Roxbury when we were actively fighting the metering and regulating station nearby, helping all of us to understand the cost to our land and to our climate change events. She's just been a wonderful advocate in this arena. She was also a guest speaker as one of our Theodore Parker lecturers about 4 years ago. So we're excited to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to sponsor another great community conversation. Take good care. Be well.
So nice to hear Reverend Ann in that message. And we do know that the volume, we turned it up as loud as we can, and Zoom technology is sometimes a little challenging. The next thing that we want to share with you is a commercial. We, during these community conversations, have made commercials featuring Black-owned businesses, mostly in Nubian Square. Part of our work is addressing in every way we can the racial wealth gap that exists in Boston. And one of the small ways that we try to do that is to encourage everyone who's watching and all of our member congregations across Greater Boston to support the businesses that we lift up in these commercials. And we're so excited to share a different kind of commercial this evening, which is about a local gym. So we're happy to share this information about a fitness center. So here's our commercial.
Hi, my name is Emmanuel Williams, the owner-operator of Unified Fitness Hyde Park, 1 Weston House Plaza. I love to help people get to where they're trying to get to, being reintroduced to who they are physically and spiritually. The spiritual side of the body is connected with the natural side of the body. Your body is your temple. And the only person that has control of it is you. My fitness background is life experience. I used to be 400 pounds. So when I changed my lifestyle, it opened up a new pathway for me in helping people get to where they want to be. And that's how Unified Fitness started. Unified mind, body, and spirit. If you are a participant or somebody that want to train and have never worked out before, we will gradually take you into a design a workout that is designed for you to grow so we can move into a higher level workout experience. Our gym is small, friendly. We observe all mask protocols, sanitizing, wiping the machines. So when you come in, feel safe. We are a feel safe zone. So set up a consultation with me at Unified Fitness. We can meet and talk about your goals. Until then, always strive with purpose and expect change. Be fabulous.
And we want to thank our social justice fellow, Veale Israel, for another great commercial. So now is our main event, and we couldn't be more excited to welcome the Reverend Mariama White-Hammond. Reverend Mariama is an advocate for ecological and social justice, youth engagement, and spirit-filled organizing. She was recently appointed Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Spaces for the City of Boston. Reverend Mariama is also the founding pastor of New Roots AME Church in Dorchester. New Roots is a multiracial, multi-class community that is innovating new ways of being a church. Reverend Mariama is active in secular and interfaith justice efforts. In particular, she uses an intersectional lens in her ecological work, challenging folks to see the connections between immigration and climate justice, or the relationship between energy policy and economic justice.
She is a fellow with the Green Justice Coalition and co-chair of Renew New England. She has spoken throughout the country and was the MC for both the 2017 Boston Women's March and Boston People's Climate Mobilization. As the former director of Project Hip Hop, she used the arts as a tool to raise awareness for social issues. Reverend Mariama has received numerous awards, including the Bar Fellowship, the Celtics Hero Among Us, the Roxbury Founders Day Award, and the Boston NAACP Image Award. She was selected as one of the GRIST 50 Fixers for 2019. Sojourner's 11 Women Shaping the Church and Get Connected, Boston's most impactful Black women of 2021. It is an honor to be here with Reverend Mariama.
So I want to welcome Mariama. Nice to see you, Reverend Mariama. But I do want to add just a personal note before we begin, that I met Reverend Mariama when I first came to the urban ministry about 6.5 years ago, when she was one of a group of people with whom I was working to bring Reverend William Barber to Boston. And that began, we forged a group that did a bunch of organizing over a number of years. And I have come to know her and had the gift of getting to know what a bright light she is. She is a true visionary and somebody whose temperament is that she doesn't want to be called a true visionary. Her faith is lived and it is real, and her commitment to building a better world is true and real and authentic. And it is my honor and joy to be with her this evening. So welcome, Reverend Mariama.
Thank you, Reverend Mary Margaret, who I also consider a friend. We've worked together and marched together and done many things together. But I also really just appreciate, I remember there was a moment when Reverend Barber was here and we were running around and we were trying to figure it out. And my robe wasn't ironed, and she just took it from me and said, "You figure this out and I'm going to figure this out." And I was, and made sure that like everything was coming together. And I'm not saying there are not great men in the movement, but there's something about having a sister friend that is special. And I thank you for being that in my life, for your just solidarity and the ability to sort of be real and lean in. And I still think I owe you that hot sauce, don't I?
Yes.
I did. Mary Margaret dropped off, so she had a surplus of hot chili peppers, and I made some hot sauce, and I feel like I still have it. So I'm going to make sure that I drop off.
I love hot sauce. Yeah. Thank you. Which actually ties into this evening's talk.
It does. It does.
Growing hot peppers and making stuff from the earth. So it's actually a great segue, Reverend Mariama.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to start because you have a lot of experience with farming, growing peppers, growing all kinds of things. And I wondered, tonight our topic is Black people and the land. And that covers, there's a lot to say and talk about that. But I wondered if you could talk about your own experience and your family's experience with farming and connecting with the land.
Yeah. So on my father's side, my grandmother, who I came to know really, really well, she, as a kid, she lived in Philadelphia, and we spent a lot of time there. She's a teacher there. And she was both she and my grandfather were Black folks who were part of the sort of large migration of folks. My grandfather came in that early wave. His family came to Princeton, New Jersey. My grandmother came a little bit later. She lived in Surry County, Virginia for the beginning of her life until she moved to the Philadelphia area in search of more opportunity and better job prospects. And but my family, like last year in November, I had the opportunity, or I think it was October, had the opportunity to go visit my family in Surry County, Virginia, where my grandmother grew up. And our story is story of many Black families. My family were farmers and had amassed a decent amount of land and have lost quite a bit of that land over time. Surry County, Virginia is a very rural place. And it is along the James River, across the river, quite frankly, from Jamestown, where the first slaves arrived in this country. We tend to think of Alabama and Mississippi as sort of places where there was a lot of plantation labor, but Virginia for many years was the central slave port in this country. And for many of us who are trying to trace our history, Virginia is the place where that history begins. We've been trying to figure out, did my family always stay there? Did some people go other places? But that is where our roots are. And I had the opportunity to go when I was younger, and it's only been at this point in my life that I've sort of begun to put all of those pieces together. 2 years ago, we celebrated the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first slaves to these shores. And it's a complicated and challenging thing. I've done my, genealogy and there's a lot of work still to be done there. And have gotten my DNA analysis, and what it says is that some of my heritage comes from Nigeria, some comes from what is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, where my sister did live for a while. Some comes from Ireland. I mean, there's just this wide range of where our roots come from. But, what we do know is that my ancestors came to these shores through that great sin. It wasn't a migration. It wasn't like an immigration story, like some Texas textbooks have tried to say. We were forced here. And in many instances, we ended up working land where Native American people had been displaced from, so that land could be taken by white settlers and then worked by our blood, sweat, and tears. And so that is my family's history. And my grandmother and grandfather also represent this trend of Black folks that say, I don't want to live in those conditions anymore. I want to seek something else. My grandmother really wanted to continue her education, but as a girl in a rural community where, there wasn't a lot of money, she never could finish college and finish high school when she wanted to. And so after my dad and my uncle were old enough to go into school, my grandmother went back to college and earned her degree to become a teacher. And so in many ways, she left the land behind, because for many of us, that relationship with the land is a really complicated one. There was so much injustice in the way that our labor was used on the land, so much stealing of land, using of tax policy and other, methods to move Black people off their land. And so there is an irony to the fact that in 2008, I started getting into gardening. In fact, I started with orchids. I bought an orchid at IKEA, truthfully, and it would bloom at night. And I remember waking up in the morning being so excited by the bloom of this orchid. It wasn't until years later that I recognized that plant became so important to me in a time when I was working at Project Hip Hop. And within a 10-month period, 5 of our young people were shot. 2 of them were killed. 2 of them ended up in pretty major physical therapy. One unsure if he would save his leg. Another still not to the same level of physical capability he was at the time. And so the plants and planting became part of my own therapy, though I'm not sure I would have recognized it at the time. And I went from orchids. I'm still into orchids. I'm the only Black member of the Massachusetts Orchid Society. If there's another one, let me know. I haven't met them yet, but and I got it. And then I went from there to herbs. And next thing you know, I wanted to plant more. And I signed up to be in a community garden. I'm now the one of the co-coordinators of that garden. And last year, a group of us launched a Black-owned cooperative farm in Loudoun, New Hampshire, which probably most folks have never heard of. But if you have heard of it, it's most famous for the NASCAR track that is there, which is a pretty good symbol of the sort of political leanings of Loudoun, New Hampshire. But we haven't met any other Black people from Loudoun, but that's where we farm and have quite a few things going in the ground, and were there last year. But farming and that relationship with the land has, in many ways, brought me full circle. and trying to forge a relationship that is not built in oppression and that allows me to be in right relationship with the land, which is complicated. Because even in New Hampshire, the land that we're on, it is stolen land. At one time, there were indigenous folks who had freedom to be in that space and were forcibly removed, massacred, and have now, sort of coalesced in much smaller numbers, but are no less still there. And we're trying to build relationships and really think about what would it mean to honor the land, honor what has happened there, and build something new in that space that is reflective of the world we hope for.
It's all these layers.
So many
layers.
And the fact that, our growing season is expanding every year because of climate change and, all the complexities of what that means and what it will mean for maple tapping season, if there will even be a maple tapping season 20 years from now, and that being such a huge part of the long-term history of our region. And, so there's so many, as you said, so many layers, so much complexity.
Agreed. Thank you, Mariama. Listening to you makes me think about the story, a recent story, with regards to, I think it was Bruce Beach, where the beach was just returned to a family that lost it or had it stolen. And that's the story of so many Black people. I'm glad they've gotten it back, because it was taken over 97 years. And that's the story that's impactful to so many. And, we know history doesn't always tell the true story about those experiences. Can you talk a little bit about displacement and kind of the story about Black land ownership and what it means, the feeling, the connection to earth, the experience that is so impactful for Black people?
Yeah. So, the loss of Black land has been, the numbers are astronomical. I don't know if people know that in the recent American Recovery Plan, one of the important elements of that is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has admitted that they were 20 years ago, they agreed to change their practices in terms of granting loans to Black folks. I mean, one of the things is, as the shift moved from like smaller farmers to sort of larger agricultural operations, that caused a lot of damage to small farms of all races. But of course, the impact was heaviest felt in Black communities. And the U.S. government participated in giving loans to white farmers and not Black farmers. Now, there's a lot of complexity, but the main deal was that they created these committees at the local level that made those decisions. And of course, they gave it to their cousins, their friends, the people they knew. If you're in a segregated community and there's a clear belief that, white folks are dominant, that played out in the way that those loans were dispersed. And so, at this point, the government is trying to, just keep its promise. I mean, I think that, Republicans try to paint it as reparations, but like the reality is it's not really reparations if you're doing what you told people that you would do 20 years ago and you just didn't do it. So, the sad thing is that in the interim, many of those Black farmers that existed, 20 years ago, well, in the interim of not receiving the help they were supposed to receive, their farms went under. And so this is particularly true in the South. It is also partially true here, although there was not nearly as much landowning here as for many reasons, including discriminatory practices here. And it continues to be a problem. We look at a program like the Healthy Incentives Program, which I believe in really, it's a really important program. It allows folks who get SNAP benefits or food stamps, as we used to call them, to use their electronic, debit card at farmers markets. And what it says, for every dollar that you spend at the farmers market, the state will match that with another dollar. We've overwhelmingly found that the largest farms, the white farms in the rural parts of Massachusetts, were first in getting their applications in approved. And then a lot of times they would shut the process down, maybe because they didn't have enough staff to approve. But the point is, the folks at the front of the line were the well-resourced farms. And many of our farms, even here locally, farms by folks of color, immigrant farms that are growing items that a lot of our folks would like to eat, right? Culturally appropriate items. Until Urban Farm Institute started doing okra, people were sometimes going all the way to New York to get okra, right? There's certain kinds of Asian greens. People were going far distances to get them because you couldn't get them here. And you have a new generation of farmers, many of them immigrants, who had a farming background in their home country and are adapting to farm here, who, again, through, first come, first serve, which often means the biggest, the most well-resourced, the ones who are in the know, get in first. And you find our folks who actually have a mission to serve our communities that are most food insecure, often at the back of the line in terms of how they're being served. So I think it's really important to not just think of this as a Southern problem. Mm-hmm. It's an everywhere problem. And here, one of the biggest issues, there may be less sort of overt policies that there were in the past, but there have always been. Keeping those prices high means people can't afford it. When you talk about displacement, it's what we see happening in Roxbury and Dorchester right now. Folks who've been in these communities for years, finding themselves priced out because the prices are too high, because the rents are too high, because they can't keep up with the property taxes. And I've been even looking in my own department. For instance, I'm in charge of landmarks, really excited. We need to honor the history of but just asking the question, do we ever, by making something a landmark, do we inadvertently make it so that some people who have the money to keep their house up to those standards are able to thrive, and folks who can't do that because their tax bill is too high, because their food bill is too high, they end up being pushed out of a neighborhood, right? Is there a possibility that that's happening? And I'm not saying that it definitely is. I'm just saying there's all these times where we make policies and we may not be actively thinking to discriminate against certain people, but we are centering the needs and experiences of those who can participate and not always asking, is this truly accessible to everybody? And that's true about so many land policies, so much of our climate policy, so much of what we do, whether or not is intentional. If we don't center the most vulnerable, we are highly likely to make policies that do not meet their needs. And because people are so on the edge, they get pushed out of places they've grown up in, they spent their lives in, they've invested in. And that's the story, not just in the South, not just on the farmland, but right in our urban neighborhoods.
Which, you're speaking from the intersectional way that you look at everything and the layers and the way that you have a lens that you're looking at things with. And one of the things that I wanted for you to talk to this evening, Reverend Mariama, is, a lot of folks in our circles are working on their awakening to racial injustice, becoming more awake. There's lots of our member congregations that are doing a lot of work about racial justice. A lot of people in our congregations who have been involved in the environmental movement, environmental protection movement. I would like you to speak to, and you've been deeply involved in environmental justice work. You were on the front lines of fighting the pipeline through West Roxbury. Can you talk about what you've seen and what you understand about how sometimes getting involved in the environmental movement, there are ways that it happens that actually uphold racism and the interplay between these things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think it's really, really important to look at the history, right? The history of the environmental movement is a checkered past. I am really thankful some of the work that the Sierra Club has done to really lean into what their own past has been, looking at the history of eugenicists within their midst, people who felt like the world would be better if some of these folks weren't on the planet, right? And I hear that still in environmental. Oh, well, we're overpopulated. You're right. We might be overpopulated. You know who we should get rid of? The high income folks, because they produce a lot of emissions, right? If we're coming from that perspective, what I hear people saying is, oh, we just have too many poor people, but they use less per capita. If you were really trying to be efficient coming from that perspective, you get rid of people like me, right? Who, even if I have an electric car, I still have to go on vacation, right? And I still, right, consume at a rate, right? So, there's a lot within our past that we need to grapple with, because when you don't look at it, and any of us who've been in therapy know, right? Once you start pulling those layers back, you find that the source of many of your current challenges are things that have happened in the past. And that is no less true in the environmental movement. I am thankful that some folks have tried to begin that reckoning, but there's still a lot more work to be done to really look at the ugly past of the environmental movement. And one of the key pieces within that is its complicity at times with certain forms of oppression that have removed people from land, particularly removing the indigenous people. I mean, the gall. Some of the folks who've done the best job throughout history of living in right relationship with the land. You think white people who done stole people's land again and again are the best ones to make the decisions about how to move forward? Like the foolishness of that, right? But I think now what I think I see a lot is, so the first thing I would say is we need to recognize that the engine of progress that we now recognize to be problematic is so deeply intertwined with white supremacy and the idea of manifest destiny and the idea that some people have the right to take over the land and take over the people. You can never see an abuse of the land that is separated from the abuse of the people. And if you look for abuse of people, you should dig a little deeper. There is abuse of land also happening. There's a deep intertwining of a notion of dominance and who deserves to be on top. That's really at the heart of this. Because if we didn't think that we as humans deserve to be on top, and then some humans thinking that they're the best of the humans deserving to be on top, you would never pollute your water, because it's the building block of our lives. Like, that is a crazy notion. Like, I don't know how to make new water. Do you know how to make oxygen? No, I do not, right? And I know I need them to live. So the idea that we would choose to be in bad relationship with the things we literally need to live is a very sick system. And I don't think we can shift just talking about parts per million in the atmosphere, or we're going to get this policy, we're going to put up these solar panels. I work on all of that. But at the root of it all is a sick mentality that says my needs for right now, my desires for right now, take precedence over the balance of the very system of life that I depend on to live. And that is what needs to change. If that way of living and being doesn't change, not only do we have no chance of shifting climate change, quite frankly, I don't think we deserve to live. Because the rest of the planet is acting right. There's only one bad actor in here. And if we can't get it together, it might not be that unjust that we just pass away. So we need to be worthy of remaining. And that means getting in right relationship with each other and every other being on the planet. So the idea that we should prioritize lowering some parts per million without asking who have we harmed it means we are ignoring the central question of how we got ourselves into this problem in the first place. And so I routinely hear people talking about, oh, the climate crisis, it's so urgent. It is absolutely urgent. I'm not denying that. But they use the urgency to justify policies that still have the rising tide will lift all boats, which we done learned long ago, it doesn't work. And so my question is, who have we asked to bear the burden again and again? And how do we shift our approach, our mentality, our ethos to prioritize those folks that we have harmed? And that also means non-human beings, right? But it is sad to me when I hear it overall. It is most distressing when I hear people of faith, because we are supposed to get it, that there is a bigger picture that we are called to. And if we don't get that bigger picture right, then nothing else is going to come into the right view. And so, this most recent bill that we've just passed, the roadmap, it got better over time. It definitely got better over time. And I think people should work on it. But I can tell you, it did not start from an equity framework. And there's a lot of environmental stuff that comes out that doesn't start from an equity framework. So as an example, if we're looking at energy policy, I am so glad everybody can get solar and get off the grid. But it is possible that as people of means get off the grid, the maintenance of the grid, the cost for maintaining that ends up falling to those folks who can't afford to get off the grid. So if we have subsidies that help people to get solar panels, maybe we shouldn't target it to everybody. Maybe we should say some people can afford to do it without the subsidies. Let us target our money. If we only have, now I'm glad, grow the pie, make sure there's enough for everybody. But when we had solar subsidies in large quantities, overwhelmingly, they went to suburbanites who were like pro-environment and driving Priuses. They did not go to folks in Roxbury who were struggling to pay their bills. Because if we had made sure they had solar, not only would they have had clean energy and reduction in the amount of emissions that would have helped their children's asthma, but they would have been able to eat more. And so why are we not prioritizing policies that lift up the environment, but also lift people out of poverty? We could be doing it that way, but in the name of urgency, we often fight for things that in the end up benefiting those who already been benefiting over those who have not. And so my push is, how do we shift that? For instance, a lot of us are talking about electrification. I believe we need to do that. I want you to start organizing in your neighborhood to get the electric substation then. Because right now what's happening is, in the name of electrification, a new substation is being put in East Boston. East Boston already lost half of its land to the airport that the rest of us use, the residents of East Boston use. East Boston already lost its land to all the parking lots that we use to go to the airport, and the jet fuel that we need to go to the airport, and the salt piles that we need to desalt at the airport. And, so they have paid their dues 10 times over. If we're going to electrify, I want to see folks in Weston and folks in Norwood and folks in lots of other communities begin to say, you know what? Justice would be put the substation here. Don't ask the same communities who've always sacrificed again and again to bear the burden.
Thank you for that, Reverend Mariama, and thank you. And I could listen to you for hours, and I know our folks also can. And so I'm going to say something that's going to frustrate them, the viewers right now, because I want to remind everybody that Reverend Mariama has just been named to a new role in the city, overseeing, as she said, everything from archaeology to animal control, as Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Spaces. So that means she needs to be at another community meeting at 7 o'clock. I feel very honored that she was able to spend this time in a pretty packed schedule. So we're going to leave the next just 15 minutes for Q&A because she really needs to be at another meeting at 7. We usually can go a bit longer, but we are on a tighter time frame. So I'm going to read, and my colleague Monique is going to facilitate the Q&A, but I'm going to read just a couple of chat links. So what you can do is go to the Q&A box or the chat and chat your questions to Reverend Mariama or your comments. While you're going there, I am going to read some of the comments that already came in. A viewer said, I'm nodding my head in agreement like a puppet with a motorized slinky for a neck, meaning she's like with you. So she's with you. Amen and amen, Reverend Mariama is one of the comments that came in. So I know that people are definitely hearing. And Monique, do you want to kind of take some of the Q&A so people can feel free to send your comments and your questions for the next 15 minutes with Reverend Mariama?
Absolutely. And there's one other comment in the Q&A section, and it's coming from Diane Phillips. Terrific program. So thankful to hear Reverend Mariama's thoughts. And I would agree with her. This was absolutely not enough time for us to listen to you and to share all of what you have with us. So we are grateful for what you are able to share with us at this time.
One of the questions is, Reverend Mariama, what are the action steps you would want people to take who are listening and watching?
So I think a number of things. One of the things I would say is really spending the time to unpack some of that history, right? Sometimes I do think we think, oh my gosh, there's so much to do, I don't have time to go back. But it is worthwhile to sit with that. I think even exploring your own family's history with land, right? What and all of its beauty and all of its brokenness, right? There's so much complexity. So I definitely really do think it makes sense for us to spend some time looking at where we've come from so that we both can learn from that, celebrate that, and not repeat the mistakes of the past. I think for those of you who are already engaged, so some of you may already be engaged in advocacy work. I think the big question I always ask is, with every policy, and the Green Justice Coalition actually has a whole list of questions, the equity tool that they have, and I'll see if I can find the website so you can access that. But the simple question is, with this policy, who's going to bear the burdens and who's getting the benefits? I find that on the whole, when you ask that question and you spend a little time digging, right? If the answer is everybody and everybody, no, usually that's not true. Usually when you have everybody's going to benefit, everybody's going to get the burden, I can tell you how that usually gets down. The people who usually got the burden get the burden, and the people who usually got the benefits got the benefit. Unless you craft it so that it does not flow in your status quo direction, it will flow as things usually do. So my big piece is before, and people have come to me, oh, we want you to support this policy. And I often have to ask them, who gets the benefits and who gets the burdens? If they say it's, the rising tide lifts all boats, nope, I'm not doing that. I want to see a policy that specifically sends benefits to those who've been burdened in the past and ask those who've not been asked to bear the burden to take up their cross on this one, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's really important in lots of ways. I do also want to emphasize some of the things that you're already doing, really looking at, Black businesses and businesses of color, because the reality is, I think probably many people have heard this statistic, but it's still jarring every time, that the average wealth for a white family in Boston is $247,500, and the average wealth for a Black family in Boston is $8. That isn't going to shift if we don't talk about land and home ownership and income. Mm-hmm. And I've been to so many spaces where people want to talk about all sorts of other things, but the two drivers of wealth are land and home ownership and income. If we're not talking about those things, then we're not talking about, and my grandmother was a teacher, my sister was a teacher. I believe in the power of education, but I am tired of people trying to think that education is going to fix the unequal distribution of land and income. It ain't going to happen, y'all. So it can be helpful. I'm not saying it's not worth working on, but we need to get serious about looking at those root causes. And I do think at some point, if you've gotten a lot of benefit, you need to ask yourself, what burden can I carry? Not just trying to lift someone else up. What burden are you willing to carry? Where are you willing to talk to your neighbors? Are you really willing to say, you know what, when I look at it, the distribution of where polluting facilities are, or, because here's what I think. If we had put the polluting facilities, if we had cited them for Wellesley and Wayland, guess what? We would have accelerated our move to renewable energy because those folks would have wanted to get those things shut down yesterday. And so when we all bear the burden equally, if not some who have not borne it in the past asked to do more, what will be amazing is suddenly they'll be super excited about policies that end pollution, period. And so I think beginning to ask, how can you engage folks in an honest conversation? Have we been bearing our fair share of the burden? What can we begin to do to make that happen? So I think these are principles that can go across many different campaigns, work that you're doing within your congregation. If folks have specific things that they want to ask on in terms of solar policy or the Department of Public Utilities, which they forgot the P was in their name. They might as well just take that out and be the DU. That's how I feel about them. But we could talk about that in some other, at least they'd be more honest. I feel like start from a place of honesty. Don't tell me I'm in there, and definitely don't tell me I'm first. At least name yourself DUPE. The Department of Utilities, public, sometimes. But anyway.
Sorry.
Thank you for saying that. That is priceless.
I'm probably not supposed to say that as an elected official because I have to work with them and they approve my letters and stuff like that, but I'm just keeping it real.
We appreciate that realness. And another, not so much a question, but a comment from Dave Harrington. You are giving us a wonderful framework for evaluating city council candidates, for instance, as well as other elective offices.
I think that's great.
It's wonderful programming. Thank you so much.
We're in the middle of, election season on the municipal level. We'll be at that place with the governor quite soon, and our state offices. And again, I'm not trying to call people out, but I'll just say I have worked with a state senator who people laud for his commitment to environmental pieces. But ask him where he stands on race, because he feels that race shouldn't be included. And, he actively tanked a solar bill we had on making sure that there were subsidies and support for low-income folks and folks of color, simply because race was in there. And I'm trying not to call him out, but I think I'm only saying what he's publicly said, Senator Barrett. And I think we need to ask hard questions of our environmental advocates. Are you working from an intersectional lens? Or do you have the sort of white supremacist notion of there's so much urgency on this, we don't have time to deal with racial justice? Because for me, that's also just a false choice. Why would we do a policy that addresses one thing when we could do a policy that addresses 2 and 3 challenges at the same time? Wouldn't that pass better? I think about friends I know who are organized in Illinois. Illinois was passed. So Massachusetts is known. We're the number 1 in energy efficiency. We could talk about later on why I wish we would stop winning that award. But anyway, we're supposed to be number 1 in energy efficiency. But when Illinois was setting up their program, they decided that when they set up their sort of energy efficiency tracking group, the group that would go out and do the assessments of people's houses, that they would give first sort of training and support to kids aging out of foster care. Why? Because kids aging out of being in foster care is the strongest correlation for whether or not you'll end up in prison. The only thing that's of similar is if your parent also went to prison, but being in foster care is probably the strongest correlation. And what was key is what happens is kids who are aging out of foster care hit this point. They think they're grown like everybody when they're 18, but they don't have a support system around them. And so if they don't find their way into a college program or some sort of training program or a job where they're going to be nurtured, they end up lost, which doesn't make them that different from many of us, who are 18 and you're trying to figure yourself out. But if you don't have the support system around you to support you, and sometimes to tell you to sit down because you're being a hot mess, you find yourself lost. You can end up in the wrong avenues and the wrong crowd. And so when they decided that those folks would be the crew that they would first offer these jobs to first, it started off with, consumer advocates at the table. And then you got some of your environmental types at the table, right? But once they chose foster care kids, once you started getting your child advocates on the table, your formerly incarcerated folks at the table. When was the last time legislators saw formerly incarcerated people sitting with consumer advocates, sitting with child advocates, sitting with environmental folks? I don't know how many of you have ever been to a meeting that looked like that. And suddenly, the same program and the same dollars, we're not going to just increase energy efficiency and lower the need for new power plants, but it might just lift kids out of poverty and prevent them from ending up incarcerated. And instead of spending the money to lock them up, you could be spending that same money to make your housing stock more energy efficient.
Yep.
And so when we don't choose to be intersectional, we actually increase the chance that we lose because we don't have the powerful kinds of coalitions that make people stop and look. And we end up being lazy and lacking of imagination for the kind of world we could be building, but we're settling for a half step above the status quo when we could be blowing it away. And so I want to challenge us in everything we do, not just in legislation, even in our church programs. Why are we just feeding people? Could we be growing food? Could we be engaging those same people in growing the food and then say, you put in a day's work, take it home. Take it to your folks. Now somebody has a new skill. They've gotten the mental health, benefits of being out on the land. And it won't work for everyone, but it will work for some folks. Why are we not rethinking our front lawns at a church that don't nobody use? I mean, you spend the money to cut them. Why couldn't you spend the money instead on building boxes out front that allow people to grow food, that build relationships between the community and the church, that give you new opportunities to imagine what beloved community looks like? And it will be a little bit messier, and it will take more imagination, and there may be a few extra steps that you don't quite know how to do. But I think this moment in history calls for us to be more creative and more courageous and more community-minded than we've ever been before. Because if we can't be that, I just don't know if we deserve to survive. Some days it looks like the planet would be better without us. But I do believe that the divine spark is within us. I think if we lead with a desire to really, really, really be in right relationship with our neighbors, with the natural world around us, if we lead from that, I think we will find deep healing for our souls, for our societies, and for our planet. So I hold that as my hope. I know we've all been on the timeout step with COVID. We're getting up off the timeout step. And the most important thing when you've been on timeout is to just make sure you don't go back to doing the same thing that put you on the timeout step. So I hope on the other side of this pandemic, we don't keep deforesting and keep making it hard for people to survive, and keep supporting policies that displace people from land, and keep supporting the benefits going to big companies that have wreaked so much havoc. We're on the other side of this soon, and I hope we will break out and be better than we've ever been before.
So just an amen and an amen and an amen to you, Reverend Mariama. And this is, you are so inspiring, and you are a visionary, and it is our honor to hear you. There's a lot of comments popping up right now. Love your passion and your energy. Big hugs all around.
I see a question about the dirt bikes, and I actually would love to talk about that. I actually I have to go to a meeting. That's another parks meeting.
Right. So what I want to say, though, I wanted to end with there's all these wonderful comments, and I want to end with one from our dear friend, Stan Griffith, who's here. And he said, I hope the Reverend will come back for a part 2. So much to learn from you. So that's the last thing I want to say is, Reverend Mariama, I hope you will consider coming back again and speaking to the people who are wanting to hear what your message is. And perhaps you will consider joining another community conversation sometime.
Yes. If you ask Mary Margaret, I will make it happen.
I think it's just a lot of appreciation.
Thank you.
A lot. Thank you so much for sharing all that you did with us.
It was great to be with you. Thank you, Mariama.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, I will see you and going to maybe a little less. We're going to try to bring the same energy to
bring it to your next meeting.
Slightly more tense conflict, but I'm so thankful to be with you and look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right. Be well.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye,
Take care.
Mariama.
Good night.
Good night. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we hope that we'll see you next month when we welcome former State Representative Byron Rushing. We'll conclude our community conversations for this season of them.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you, and enjoy. And we'll see you June 22nd.
All right. Be well, everybody.
Bye-bye.